Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Viddhishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both together. May that one nourish us both together. May we work conjointly with great energy. May our study be vigorous and may it be effective. May we not mutually dispute with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Shantu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukhabhag Bhavet. May all beings be prosperous and happy. May all be free from illness. May all achieve perfection in this life. May none suffer from miseries in this world. So we have some participants here with us, and one question was, what is Dharma? And so maybe I should deal with that first and put it in the context of our subject matter. But the subject matter is partly to do with it, and I have taken the aphorisms of Patanjali from his treatise, his sutra literature on yoga. And this is divided into 4 convenient parts or chapters. They are logical in their sequence. The first part tells us what meditation is, or concentration. And then the second part is how to practice it. And the third part then is what do we gain from it in terms of various encouraging benefits. And then lastly, how we and what we are aiming for, and that is a kind of separation. What kind of separation? It is the peculiarity of the Oriental mind to say that there is a oneness. Abrahamic religions approach it from a different point of view. They will have God as a transcendent being, something that is beyond us, external and separate. And we are creatures, and we are separated by our own shortcomings, separated by what is theologically called sin. And the only way we can breach the gap between the Lord that sits in the heaven and ourselves is really to succumb to the will of that Almighty One and be saved. Now that's a kind of theology, and many of the Abrahamic religions will adopt that position. But whether it's yoga as a philosophy, or Vedanta as a philosophy, or Sankhya as a philosophy, whatever the system, the arrangement is very different. And overall, we can say there is one existence, something like a big ocean. You can imagine a large circle, and that circle is characterized by something that projects infinitely, called Brahman, a supreme principle, and our own selves, which we might call self or Atman, is separated but is within the circle. We are within that entity. And the only point of separation will be what is called a sense of individuality, a sense of I, aham. And so naturally, even in the Yoga Sutras, the goal is a kind of separation, a kind of freedom that comes from disjointing this difference, this separation. In this case, of course, yoga is viyoga. That is, yoga, which means joining, is also in realizing our fundamental original integration. That's the highest conclusion of the Vedanta anyway. And yoga has its own variety of it. But what is the beginning steps? What are the practices that have to be put in place in order to realize this? And the second chapter of this sutra literature, sutra means a thread, bare aphorisms, is very telling. It tells us, viveka kyatihi aviplava hana upayaha. Now we have to understand that these are just words strung together. That's why it's called a string, like beads on a thread. And unless we have some commentary, we won't understand these individual words. But what it translates as is viveka, that is, the means of the removal is discernment or discriminative knowledge, which is undisturbed. The means of the destruction of ignorance, we may say, is unbroken practice of discrimination. And what do we mean by ignorance? And Patanjali lays out different kinds of waves in the mind stuff. And one wave will be wrong knowledge, what we might call ignorance. The other one is right knowledge, what we may know as pure, clarified knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of whatever we find once we make a discrimination. And in this way, all the yogas find common ground. Because practice in spirituality or religion simply means that we have to sort things out. Things are mixed up. The ultimate seer that is within us is mixed up with the seen, and the seen takes the form of locally our own body, our own mental field, and the whole universe. The world of, we don't have to go to the stars and galaxies and all that. We have enough of our world to deal with. We have friends, we have relatives, we have enemies, seemingly. We have all of these kinds of activities that we have to do. We have many obstacles that we have to deal with. And if we're not careful, we will think that we are the victim of an unfair plot, because life is not really that easy. We admit it. But then what's the cause of this uneasiness? It's our reaction to the world. It's not that the world is intrinsically difficult. It's that we don't use our equipment to find a way around it in a clever, skillful, and joyful way, taking it as a kind of game. And so the means of the destruction of ignorance is unbroken practice of discrimination. And the next few verses, I'm going to focus on the commentary that Swami Vivekananda gives. And Swami Vivekananda has simply summarized great commentators such as Vyasa. We can also mention Vyasa and Vachaspati, who gives a commentary on Vyasa's commentary itself. But we have to understand what we mean by ignorance to start with. So let us take some examples. As soon as we discover, as soon as we really think deeply, as soon as we explore what is the nature of nature itself, we come to one scientific conclusion. The world is not what we see it is. The world is not what we hear it to be. The world is not what we fear it to be. You can lick it and you won't discover what it is. You'll only discover what it tastes like. And all of the sense organs that we have are all designed to interpret the world of subtle forces, subtle elements which are there, unseen. Unless we delve deeply into the nature of the universe that we call physics. And the new kind of physics has evolved. From the 1920 and odd, there's been a new kind of physics. And we can't register it any long in the language of Newton or even the language of Einstein, nothing of that nature. And Einstein himself was a contributor toward this deeper understanding of the universe. And so the ancient yogis saw this universe in a different way. All mystics will see the universe in a very different way. And what will be the effect? Well, the effect will be that they'll know how to handle it, number one. And secondly, they will not be affected by it. And this realization comes in 7 stages. Now, the number 7 is very significant. 7 days of the week, 7 notes on the piano, whether it's 7 notes in the Indian system, Sari Gama Pada Nisa, or whether it's Do Re Mi Fa So. The significance of 7 is there. It seems to present ourselves with some kind of mathematical rhythm. And so the great engineering genius, Nikola Tesla, who was also a physicist, but mainly his interest was on electrical energy. And he was extremely careful about the number 7. Everything had to be in 7. That was his peculiarity, and people thought he was nuts. But he must have had some mathematical reason to understand that there is a certain rhythm to do with this. And so in the Jewish tradition, there are 7 heavens, or 7 worlds. And certainly in the Hindu system also, we find 7 worlds. 7 worlds above and 7 worlds below. Bhu, Bhuva, Swaha, Tapaha, Janaha. All of these are worlds that comprise overall 7. And they represent 7 mystical realms that we can delve into. And discrimination or discernment, really, the practice of that is really to distinguish what Swami Vivekananda here puts in his commentary. I'll read it out. So the means of destruction of ignorance is unbroken practice of discrimination. This is the real goal of practice. Some people think that the goal of practice is an easy life. Some people think the goal of practice is heaven. Some people think that the goal of practice is to get wealth. But the real goal of practice is discrimination or discernment between the real and the unreal. And I use the English word discernment only because the word discrimination has got some baggage that goes with it, because we hear racial discrimination, gender discrimination, this kind of thing. But discernment has within it a kind of external monitoring entity, a kind of executive officer that makes an informed decision about things. And that's where we start. We have to stand back a little bit and we have to decide what is real. Now, when we say what is real, we have to be careful of these terms, because when you talk about spirituality and talk about meditation, talk about spiritual practice, you hear some people say, yeah, but what about the real world? And here it exposes their ignorance, because the real world that they're talking about is a world full of change. It's completely impermanent, and it'll disappear, and it does disappear in a sleep and a dream. And Ramana Maharshi was famous of inferring, you see, the deep sleep is a dress rehearsal for death. Why do we want to worry about it? Why do we get so concerned with this issue of death? The passport person, your identity, currently with you now, disappears in a dream. You take on other personalities. Every personality in a dream is yours. And then in a dreamless sleep, the whole thing is gone. And we wonder, what was the visa that was required to go from one identity to the next until we have no identity whatsoever? And Ramana Maharshi says, well, see, death is like deep sleep, but longer. So we have to understand that by real, we mean the thing that is permanent, the thing that never changes, the thing that is true 1,000 years ago and will be true 1,000 years hence and will never change. It is always the same. It has no characteristics, no change with it, no variation within it, no parts within it. And yet all of these things combined is what we, in our ignorance, call this is real. So when we say real, we're saying permanent. When we say unreal, we are saying the thing that disintegrates. And so he goes on, the unreal, the real and the unreal, knowing that the Purusha, now this is the yogic term, sometimes in Vedanta we call it Atman. Atman means self, but Purusha has a much more elaborate meaning because Purusha means a person. And that does not mean the person made from all the food that we ate yesterday. It doesn't mean all the fabric of tissues and muscular systems and neurological driving systems and electrochemical networks. No, none of this. Purusha is derived from two terms. One is Purna, fullness, and the other is Puri, a city, the indweller of a city who is found everywhere. And once we see it as an individual thing, then the individuality of everything else goes away. So we have to know that the Purusha is not nature. This is the dualistic system of the yogis and the Sankhya's. There is an individual Purusha, and there is a collective thing under the umbrella term of nature, which includes everything else, everything that changes. And it's not nature. That is neither matter nor mind, and that because it is not nature, it cannot possibly change. It's not even mind, because mind is subtle matter in the system, and matter is gross mind. And the body has come from the mind. Whatever your mental makeup was has created the body in this system. And because it's not nature, it cannot possibly change, because nature changes. Nature is the only thing that changes. And it's only nature which changes, combining and recombining, dissolving continuously. This is a beautiful, beautiful poetic understanding of nature, because nature has a beauty, even though it's impermanent. Of course, it has a beauty because it has an origin, which is beauty itself. And so we can describe nature as, first of all, combining. Many things are combined. And when we talk about nature, we're also talking about the undercurrent of subtle forces that erupt into our familiar world that we have endorsed the real world. These are tanmatras. More or less every talk I give evokes this term and mentions this. Subtle elements that combine and recombine below the surface. And all of these come out in 7 ways, 7 unfolding stages, if you are, or levels, which we are describing shortly. And then recombining as well, and then dissolving continually. If we really want a wonderful meditation, we can sit and imagine the nature combining, recombining, dissolving, continually changing. And we are fascinated by this. And we can see it at the most fundamental, subtle level as well, this combining and recombining. And then it will occur to us in our meditation that there's some static entity that is watching all of this, an undercurrent, an under substratum which stands there. It is not changing. It's there always as a background. And when through constant practice is constant, not here and there. And constant practice, what does that mean? Pray without ceasing, said St. Paul. And I mentioned so many times that there's a book, The Pilgrim's Way. A Russian Orthodox man heard this, St. Paul's words of pray without ceasing. I wonder, how can it be possible? And then he discovered that whatever he was doing, whether he was walking on a pilgrimage, and are we not all walking on a pilgrimage? A pilgrim journey is what we're doing. And we have to take it as a pilgrim journey, otherwise we get into disturbance. And he found out, oh, it is possible, really, to make the Lord your companion, to make the Lord the way, to have what is called a chosen ideal, which is not only the way, but the goal. I'm the way, but I'm also the goal. And so, constant practice, we begin to discriminate. We begin to discriminate. And the constant practice is just a beginning until ultimately it becomes an automatic sorting process, identification process. And then we begin to discriminate, and then ignorance will vanish is the next stage, and the Purusha will begin to shine in its real nature. Omniscient means it knows every corner, it knows everything. Omnipotent and omnipresent. And these three omnis are universal descriptions of what devout worshippers call God. Let's examine each one. We only know a small portion of what is there. Science is only exploring small parts of the whole. And when they come to the general fundamental principle or origin or the elemental aspect of nature itself, then they'll have known the whole of nature. They don't have to go any further. But what is beyond that, already it's known. Omniscient, all-knowing. That is like a light that is always shining. And omnipotent, something that is always existent, and something that is omnipresent, something that is present even in the midst of the variety. And then Vyasa's commentary on this, we can go through a little bit. He starts off in his commentary by saying pain. Pain is removed on the removal of the cause of pain. And in the removal of pain consists the establishment of the Purusha in its own nature. So what is the benefit of all of this? The removal of pain. What kind of pain? Physical pain, yes. Well, physical pain will be there, but will we be in any way associated or attached to it? And then what about mental pain? Most people are suffering mental pain. It's the most marvelous beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. In the first chapter, some people bypass the first chapter because the teaching comes out in the second chapter onwards. But there's every merit in standing the first chapter. Arjun Vishara Yoga, that is the despondency or the depression of Arjun. Arjun is suffering from a depression. You can even go further. A psychological nervous breakdown, and the evidence is there. The symptoms are there. He can't hold his bow. He's shaking. He's grieving. He's crying. All of these things are there. And what is the antidote to it? We bring out the Purusha. And when we find the Purusha in its own nature, then that pain goes away. What then is the means of attaining a state of this removal of pain? Discriminative knowledge, undisturbed, is the means of the removal. Discriminative knowledge is the recognition of the distinct natures of the Purusha and the essence of matter. And the essence of matter is pure sattva, is pure existence, purity itself. And this, however, remains shaky as long as false knowledge has not been removed, says Vyasa. And when false knowledge has its seed burnt up and thus becomes incapable of continuing, a seed can be burnt and it can't be effective again as a seed. Nothing will grow from it. So incapable of fruition, then the dirt of disturbing energy, that is rajas, being removed, mental essence is in the state of the highest purity and possesses the consciousness of the highest power. And he goes on to say, and in that state flows on the stream of the notion of discrimination, free from impurity. Because when it becomes established, it becomes like a flow. It becomes knowledge itself. In the beginning, we make an effort to find out what is knowledge, what is ignorance, what is real, what is unreal, what is worthwhile, what is not, what is darkness, what is light, what is subject to disintegration or death, and what holds permanently. And so it is this discriminative knowledge, undisturbed, that is the means of the removal. And by this, it's clear that the means of removal, the path of absolute freedom, that's the goal of moksha, is the burning of the seed of false knowledge, and that it may not sprout again. And so that is Vyasa's commentary on it. And then the next verse goes like this, or the next sutra goes like this. Tasya pranta bhumihi prajna, just that simple few words like that. So his discrimination becomes final at each stage, and it is sevenfold. Now this is very interesting. So let us explore. So his knowledge is of the sevenfold highest ground. Vivekananda's commentary goes like this. When this knowledge comes, it will come, as it were, in 7 grades, one after the other. And when one of these begins, we know that we are getting knowledge. The first to appear will be that we have known what is to be known. That is, the mind will stop being dissatisfied. We can summarize it like this. The restlessness of the mind stops. Why? Because the desire for external things, in other words, the hollow that we feel inside that needs to be filled from outside, gets removed because we see that everything is already full and there are no gaps anywhere. The removal of that dissatisfaction.
No, turn on the match, Theo, or else turn it off.
We become content with exactly what we have, not wanting more, not wanting less. While we are aware of thirsting after knowledge, we begin to seek here and there, wherever we think we can get some truth, and failing to find it, we become dissatisfied and seek in a fresh direction. When we find that direction, there's a certainty. Now, this really is characterized by faith, absolute faith that we're on the right track. We don't have to look here and there. The disturbance that we originally found goes away. If I were to speak personally, I would have to say, when I was around about 15 or so, and I wasn't really satisfied with the established system that I was brought up with, and I started looking here and there. And in those days, I had a tremendous thirst to find out what the truth of something was. And it was really, looking back on it, very immature and very superficial, because I was looking at the superficial differences, looking for the very trivial questions and answers that many people ask in the beginning, and questioning established doctrine and dogma in the face of a real situation, which was death. Having faced death, having faced the circumstance of death, I wanted to find out, well, is there something that will solve this problem? Is there something that will give a surety about a post-mortem condition? And then what's the meaning of it? You're
Turn it
born
off,
for
I
a
said.
few moments, for a few decades, and you die. So what? What happened? The materialist atheists or the physicalists will say, well, nothing happens. You get snuffed out like a candle. You're just finished. What more do you want? But that would not be really possible, because we have a deep, deep instinct. It's not that we wish to survive and we wish to continue beyond the mortal state. It's that we can never imagine that we will ever have a mortality a mortal state, even if the body dies. You can test it out. Some people say, oh, I dreamt that I was dead. Well, what do you mean? Yes, I saw myself on a slab. And who was watching it? Was it not you? You can never imagine yourself in that state of death. And so all search is vain until we begin, says Swami Vivekananda, to perceive that knowledge is within ourselves, that no one can help us, that we must help ourselves. It's an extraordinary statement. But what about scripture? What about guru? What about this? What about that? What about friends? They can only indicate the way. It's like when you travel in a car. I remember going from Malin village to Malin Head, and every first signpost said 6 kilometers or 16 kilometers. Then a little bit further, after about 4 kilometers, another signpost said 20. It was a peculiar situation. I suppose because it's in the north, the mileage tends to increase. That's what seems to happen. I'm not sure. So you see, all these are just signposts, not as helpless as that, but much more helpful signposts. Here, why don't you do this? Let me guide you here. Let me guide you there. But at the end, you yourself have to do the traveling. There's no other one. You yourself have to lift yourself up. 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, discussing the conditions for meditation, makes it very clear. You are your own best friend, your own worst enemy. You can elevate yourself or lower yourself. It's entirely up to you. It's in your independent hands.
Yeah.
When we begin to practice the power of discrimination, the first sign that we are getting near truth will be that the dissatisfied state will vanish. We shall feel quite sure that we have found the truth and that it cannot be anything else but the truth.
Stop.
That we may know that the sun is rising, that the morning is breaking for us, and taking courage, we must persevere until the goal is reached. It's a wonderful statement with so many elements within it. Let's examine them. So we shall feel quite sure. We don't require any blind faith. We shall feel absolutely sure that we have found the truth and that it cannot be anything else but the truth. That conviction, unwavering conviction comes. Faith has this range. Blind faith that amounts to superstition on the one side, and unwavering conviction on the other side. Then we may know that the sun is rising, and we know this by discrimination. Because a discriminating person, it'll be self-evident. The truth about it will be self-evident. That something yet is true, in other words, something that is real, something that is unchanging, will be self-evident by the observation of all the things that are changing. And that we know that the sun is rising, the sun of knowledge, that the morning is breaking for us, a dawning then of our reality. And taking courage, we must persevere. It requires perseverance. 3 things are necessary: practice, perseverance, and purity. Now, this is the language that is being used. But as I studied this passage many years ago, I saw that there's a correlation between this and the various chakras in the tantric system. And so the first awakening comes the Muladhara, that is the root, the concentrated root. Now this is associated on the physical level with smell, the scent of smell, because smell is the most basic thing we have in our material life. Every creature finds its food from smell, and if you take away the sense of smell, you also take away taste. And its tattva, or its ruling element, is described as Prithivi, unhelpfully translated as earth. It is the lowest possible material interpretation of what is there, and yet there is a divine opening. There is an awakening within it. The inner dimension of it is what we call the awakening of that coiled up potential, that coiled up energy, the unfolding of the Kundalini. And so this supreme divine energy starts awakening within us. And this is what is being described. This is level 1. And when this awakens, then our sense and the other senses are associated with it. Sense of smell is there. This is the organ of information. But the active organ of action, karmendriya, would be the feet. In other words, the mobilizing thing, the thing that makes you move and work, is really to get food. And that is, the food comes from the earth. It is this earthiness that is being described, the solidity. Energetically, it is called magnetism. Then what happens as we go further? Let us see. The second grade will be the absence of all pains. Now that sounds astonishing, that all pains will go. It's not that pains will go. Not literally, it's that your attachment to the pain will go. You will no longer feel it, because the feeling of pain, physical pain, is the attachment to a body, and the feeling of mental pain or mental disturbance is the attachment to the world, or again to the individuality. And when that starts breaking,
Okay, 2 minutes.
then we have Swadhisthana, we have the next opening. And so this is the opening which is characterized by water. In other words, there's an easing flow. You know the phrase, go with the flow. It becomes more of an accepting nature. We are quite happy to accept whatever comes, pleasure, pain, whatever comes, we're happy to accept whatever is there. It would be impossible for anything in the universe, external or internal, to give us pain, for us to register the pain of it. And then the third awakening will come. Just dwelling on the Swadhisthana indicating this tattva of water, or energetically electrical energy. It indicates this flow. When we feel that there is a flow to life, an extra dimension, first of all, there's a faith in the solidity of things. And then there's a faith in the liquidity of things. And the organ of knowledge will be, of course, taste, but the organ of action would be the hands.
I think Paul needs to mute.
And then the third would be the attainment of full knowledge. Omniscience will be ours. In other words, when the radiant aspect of our own self is brought about, light is a symbol of knowledge. Light is a symbol of this knowledge beyond the common knowledge that we have. And this becomes a protective thing for us. And this omniscience opens up. This luminosity opens up. And then the fourth will be the attainment of the end of all duty through discrimination. In other words, the end of all boundaries. Currently, we are bound by responsibility, duties, and so on and so forth. But all of those walls and all of that circuitry will go away. And then next, and of course, that is representative of the anahata. That is where there are no two things banging together. And the reason for this is because the heart opens. When we talk about duty, we're talking about egocentricity. We're talking about benefiting ourselves. But when the heart opens, we are now ready to benefit others. We become loving beyond our own small circle. We break the boundaries of genetic love, and we become all-encompassing in our love. And the element associated with this would be Vayu. The former one was Tejas, now is Vayu. Tejas, the one thing that shines forth, and the other one is now is Vayu. That is, we become expansive, we become generous beyond every border. All boundaries are broken. This is the heart center, the 12 petal lotus. And then what is the next thing? Next will come what is called freedom of the chitta. What is the chitta? The chitta in the Sankhya and Yoga psychology will be divine energy that is seems to be caught in a kind of vortex of individuality. Chitta coming from chit, meaning consciousness. And local consciousness is there, an area, a kind of material out of which all the faculties of the mind come. And at the moment, for most people, these are restrictive. That's why we require psychologists and psychiatrists. There is a difficulty, there are obstacles within it. But in this, there's freedom of this whole chitta. And then we shall realize that all difficulties and struggles, all vacillations of the mind have fallen down just as a stone rolls from the mountain top into the valley and never comes up again. And now the next one, Vishuddha. The next will be that the chitta, the mind stuff itself, will realize that it melts away into its causes whenever we desire. Whenever we want, we can bring the world to us or withdraw away from us. We can dissolve the chitta or allow it to erupt into names and forms like a scene. We can keep it in reserve in the rehearsals and we can bring it out again. We can empty the stage and then we can fill it. So we realize that it melts away into its causes whenever we desire. And lastly, we shall find that we are established in ourself. Of course, this stage that we have just mentioned is equated to the Ajna Chakra, where the mind itself, the cosmic mind, the cosmic consciousness, will be able to dissolve into its own nature and emerge again. And lastly, we shall find that we are established in ourself, that we have been alone throughout the universe. Neither body nor mind was ever related, much less joined to us. This false boundary that I drew in my imagination and tried to relay to you has gone. This one ocean of Brahman being there, this artificial boundary has gone, has dissolved. And this is equating to the yogic language of Sahasrara, 1,000-petal lotus, infinite freedom. They were working their own way, and we, through ignorance, joined ourselves to them, to the body and mind. But we have been alone, omnipotent, omnipresent, ever blessed. Our own self, our own Purusha, was so pure and perfect that we required nothing else. We required none else to make us happy. We didn't require anything else to make us happy because we are happiness itself. We shall find that this knowledge doesn't depend on anything else. And throughout the whole universe, there can be nothing that will not become effulgent before our knowledge. Our outlook will be just this effulgence. And this will be the last state, and the yogi will become peaceful and calm, never to feel any more pain, never to be again deluded, never to be touched by misery. He will know he is ever blessed, ever perfect, and almighty. And then the next sutra will come. Yoga, it says, Yoga anga anushtanad ashuti kshaye jnana diptihi, and then viveka kyayatehe. Yoga, or the destruction of impurity, that is by the different, or the practice of the different parts of this yoga, the impurity is being destroyed, then knowledge becomes effulgent, up to discrimination. And here he gives his commentary. Now, of course, Vyasa will tell us that discriminative knowledge becomes a means of removal when achieved, and there can be no achievement without the adoption of the means to this discrimination. So how do we build up this discrimination? And so that's why the subject is being taken up. By the sustained practice of the accessories of yoga. Now we have to go back to the first chapter to find out what are these accessories. So the practical knowledge of doing this, what we have just been speaking about, is much higher, says Swami Vivekananda. It is way above our heads, but it's the ideal. So you'll see the description of it. You'll say, yes, that's okay, but that seems too difficult for me. Yes, it's first necessary to obtain physical and mental control. And then the realization will become steady in that ideal. And the ideal being known, what remains is to practice the method of reaching it. And so these methods are used. Now, along the way, of course, there are some simple outlooks that will have to be engendered. And we find this in the first chapter, in the 33rd stanza, and we remind you of how we have to cultivate these things. What is necessary? What is necessary is Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha, Sukha, Dukkha, Punya, Apunya, Vishayam. See, like that. Friendship. These are a list of qualities that we need to cultivate. And then we have to find out what is the basis for it. But friendship means friendship to all. It's not a forced kind of friendship. It's an outlook that says that the condition and the journey I'm on, everyone is on. And some are more successful at it than others. But the fact that we got a human existence is a rare thing. We can criticize somebody else, no doubt. Somebody who maybe doesn't like us. But what we have failed to notice is they're born not by accident, they're born by eons and eons of effort, arriving in the rare condition of humanity. And so in the Shankaracharya's Vivekeshudamani, Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya labors the point. It is very rare to get this human birth after so much struggle to get it. What will you do with it? Even rarer will be those interested in religion or dharma contained in the Vedas. What do we mean by dharma? We mean the thing that holds and knits things together. We mean the things that produce harmonies. Whatever is your behavior, whatever is the natural dharma or rhythm of the universe, it is only we humans who produce the discord, who upset the harmony and interfere with nature. As soon as we interfere with nature, then we have a problem. We have an ozone hole in the ozone layer, and we have many destructive elements that we are creating on the planet, and all these kinds of things. We are destroying things through wars. We are destroying the natural vegetation. All of these things, no doubt, is man's interference. Leave it to nature, see what happens. But part of our own nature, our own part in this nature, is we have this capacity for friendship to all, this understanding for all, seeing this divinity within everyone immediately evokes a friendship, regardless of whatever comes out of their mouth, or regardless of however they behave. And so then mercy is required. There's a great Buddhist meditation, all to do with mercy, all to do with expanding the heart to all beings. And we also start our meditation like this, studying the first steps in meditation. First steps, as they're called, Swami Vivekananda says, we learn that the best way to be happy is to make others happy. And why are we sitting in a state of misery and unhappiness? It's only because we shrank, we inverted ourselves into a poor me attitude into a miserly inward-looking thing, and instead of expanding ourselves like a beautiful flower and spreading our fragrance everywhere, beaming the divinity everywhere, beaming with a smile. So friendship, mercy, means we have to be compassionate for everyone who's suffering, and everyone more or less is suffering, either on the physical level or the mental level. Surely our hearts should be moved. And then gladness, happiness for those who are successful. Yes, somebody is successful, very often we're not happy. You say, you see this at the Hollywood Oscars, Everyone says, oh, I'm so happy for you. In the meantime, they say, oh, no, I should have won that Oscar. So gladness for those people, and indifference being thought of in regard to subjects happy or unhappy, good and evil, virtue and vice. We should be immune to any of these things. It means developing a non-critical attitude. And therefore being content with what we have. These are the various qualities. And these respectively will pacify this citta. We must have these four sorts of ideas, says Swami Vivekananda in his commentary. We must have friendship for all. We must be merciful towards those that are in misery. And when people are happy, we ought to be happy. And to the wicked, we must be indifferent. So with all subjects which come before us, if the subject is a good one, we shall feel friendly towards it. And if the subject of thought is one that is miserable, we must be merciful toward it. And if it is good, we must be glad. And if it is evil, we must be indifferent. These attitudes of the mind toward the different subjects that come before it will make the mind peaceful. Most of our difficulties in our daily lives come from being unable to hold our minds in this way. For instance, if a person does evil to us, instantly we want to react evil, and every reaction of evil shows that we are not able to hold the citta down. It comes out in waves towards the object, and we lose our power. And every reaction in the form of hatred or evil is so much loss to the mind. And every evil thought or deed of hatred or any thought of reaction, if it's controlled, will be laid in our favor. It's not that we lose by thus restraining ourselves. We are gaining infinitely more than we suspect. And each time we suppress hatred or a feeling of anger, it is so much good energy stored up in our favor that piece of energy will be converted into the higher powers. What a wonderful, wonderful statement, a wonderful attitude that is recommended in the so-called real world. It's a panacea for our state of unhappiness. And then, of course, the various parts of this practice of this yoga, these are put out in terms of tatra, ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, abhigraha, and abhigraha, abstinence from avariceness or jealousy or a desire to have what somebody else has, or even feeling obliged to the other. And yamaha, these are the restraints. These are the restraints. Non-injury, veracity, truthfulness, abstinence from theft, continence, or chastity, more accurately put, and absence of avariciousness. All of these are there as cultivating dharma, because the original question here was, what is dharma? These are the elements of dharma. We have to play a kind of sport, understanding that, you see, raising up the opposite is the way, was described. When a wave comes that is clearly, and this is where discernment or discrimination comes in also, so that we can see, okay, we're watching and we see something in the mind is happening. A wave of selfishness is coming. A wave of anger is coming, or despondency is coming. Even worse, a wave of darkness is coming, or a wave of activity which is there to benefit only myself. We have to raise up the opposite wave. The opposite wave is collectively called sattva. It's a kind of heading. And promoting the sattva has the effect of integrating everything, binding everything in harmony, making sure that the rhythm is restored. And when we do that, it neutralizes these other waves. And then we can see with clarity what is at the bottom. And it's compared to a lake that is always in disturbance, the lake being chitta, erupting into these various waves. And when we promote this purity, this sattva, this love, this wholesome intention, all the values of strength and beauty and goodness and love and harmony, when we bring all that up, when we see the world in a different way, when we revalue it and register all the energy to divine, the divine energy, when we register the mind as the Lord's sitting room, when we register the body as the Lord's temple, when we register the universe as the Lord's play of waves, when we universe our local situation within it as simply situational waves that disappear in a dream or a dreamless sleep and we get somehow magically restored in the morning. So when we shift our point of view, shift our perspective, and constantly practice that shift, like shifting gears in a motor car, going from tamas to rajas to sattva. Whenever we see tamas, raise it up to rajas. Whenever we see rajas, raise it up to sattva. Practice this continuous shifting, and you'll see that the waves of the chitta become calm, they become pacified. And then that is the condition for revelation to happen by itself. So I think we have now dealt with this subject. And so often we carry on with some questions here or comments, so you're free to stay if you want. And then the real talk begins. So we understand what is dharma, yes. Okay. Yeah. The nature has it already. We have a nice habit of disrupting it. Let me just poke some a little local interference into it and see what happens. Well, disharmony happens. Yeah. So dharma can be equated in a sense to harmony, and the thing that brings about harmony. Now, in the various aims that we have as universal aims, we begin with dharma, and dharma is cultivated in the first 25 years of your life. Your education, man-making education, is what Swami Purnananda characterized it as. So we work on that, and that means that's a foundational block for all the other things. And then the next thing will be, so that's characterized by an element of purity, pure life, pure intention, responsibility, duty, all of those things come under this heading of dharma. And then the next thing is in the grihastha period of time, and that is to do with artha, wealth creation. Wealth creation, well, it's not our wealth anyway. And that also contributes toward dharma. But if we misuse the wealth, then it's adharma, it's going against the harmony. And so the dharma as a building block will ensure that efforts for artha, wealth creation, will always be good and useful. And then kama, desires, necessary to fulfill desires in order to be desireless. Get that out of the way. And then legitimate desires, that is, to do with the benefit of others, to do with love, to do with harmony. Again, it comes back to a dharmic approach. And then finally, the aim is moksha. So, but it's all built on dharma. Good. All right. We leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace beyond all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you. Guru Mahagat.
Thank you, Swamiji.